So in this video, I'm going to take you through the written portion of the Unit 3 exam, and the majority of people start with Google. And when you get to Google, if you can type in my last name, Salciccii, and then Moodle, the first link that will come up is the history class, and you click on that. And again, we're going to be wrapping up Unit 3, so I click on Unit 3, and I scroll all the way to the bottom, and you will see the Kahoot for the multiple choice portion, and then this link for the written portion. Now, I've taken the liberty of already having it ready, so you don't have to wait for the loading process. And here is the first question. Label the triangular trade route appropriately, telling the story how it was the engine of the European economy. And we'll start with Europe. So Europe during this age would sail down the coast of West Africa and procure slaves. And again, a lot of reasons. The slaves had skills. There were no diplomatic repercussions for doing that. Slaves had a strong immune system from those years of the trans-Saharan trade route, and that is why they were taken by force, coerced labor, and then these slaves from West Africa were taken across the ocean in a journey called the Middle Passage, hell on earth, beatings and torture and dysentery and high mortality rates, 25% mortality rates on these awful, awful trips across the ocean. So here I would write Middle Passage. So here I'd go from Europe, the acquisition of slaves. Slaves were put on a boat to the Middle Passage, where they were brought to the Americas, in this case the West Indies. And while these people were in the West Indies, they were coerced, they were forced to acquire raw materials. So sugarcane, tobacco, cotton, raw materials. And these raw materials were put on a boat and sailed back to Europe, where they were turned into finished products. So the sugarcane became, sugar that you can use for baking. Tobacco, raw tobacco became cigars. Cotton became shirts, whatever the case may be. The profit was in that, the finished products, and with those profits, the Europeans would go back to Africa, acquire more slaves, and it became a vicious cycle. And this vicious cycle is called the triangular trade route. So I'm going to ask you to express this on paper, what I just told you here for number one. Now, number two, the 6 things that the scientific revolution changed in human thinking for medieval times. So there were 6 things. Now, here's the thing I'm asking people to do, some tangible examples. Okay, what are some tangible, real-life examples? So, number 1, independent reasoning, skepticism. That's the first thing. Thinking for yourself, essentially. Now, a tangible example would be disagreeing with me in class, which I encourage. That's an example of it. Number 2 would be people starting to question religion for the first time, whereas before, if you remember, Copernicus had to release his findings on his deathbed, or during the Inquisition, people put on the strappado in the rack. I mean, really, religion couldn't be questioned. Now, a tangible example is you're in a Bible study and you ask the instructor a question. You ask, hey, why is that? You delve a little deeper. That would be a tangible example. Number 3, people stop believing in superstition and relying on science. So an example would be, if my car doesn't start in the parking lot, I'm going to have a scientific idea in my mind saying, hey, probably the battery's not working. Is there gas in the car? What? I wouldn't say there's demons in my engine block that are possessing my car. That's superstition. So Ouija boards and palm readings and all that kind of stuff. Most people use science to explain things, not those things like in medieval times. People for the first time started asking the big, heavy questions. So if you ever have thought, why am I here? What's the purpose of it? What's the meaning of life? I have one existence. What am I going to do with it? So people started asking these questions in mass. Not to say that there weren't philosophers in ancient times, but in mass, people started asking those questions. Number 5, humanity gains control of nature. And a tangible example is we go to school in Michigan. It's cold, but in my classroom it's warm. If you think about it, I hit a little switch and hot air gets blown into that room. That's pure science. That's an easy example of how that is. And the 6th is Men and women start being viewed as equals for the first time. And again, if I have a cadaver, a male cadaver and a female cadaver, and I'm using scientific eyes, I look at the two people, two lungs and a respiratory system. Both men and women have a heart and a circulatory system. If you look at it through that lens, it's hard to say one's more superior than the other. Okay, so that's number two. Then the third one's the easiest one. The inventions that were instrumental in changing world hegemony. That means dominance, economics, or economies, excuse me, money, and culture during this time period. And this is concrete. This is tangible. Number one, the boat. Okay, this age of exploration, people started getting into boats and traveling all over the place. Number two, what they were using on the boat was an astrolabe, navigation equipment. With an astrolabe, that gave you an advantage over everybody else. And once you got there, you had to persuade the people to do what you wanted to. And, you know, guns like the blunderbuss and cannons and taking gunpowder and turning them into weapons, that was the third. And then the fourth would be the printing press. Now, the printing press, when it came out during this era, brought a whole level of access to learning that had never taken place. And obviously an example being the Reformation and the 95 Thesis being printed off on the printing press. So those are the four things, okay? So if you can repeat on paper what just came out of my mouth here, you'll get full credit for this. And I hope you put the time in so I can give everybody an A. That would make me happy. Thanks for watching.